So moving on to the rest of these wounds, people will see someone who has a bodily impairment that often results in a functional impairment, and because of that, a cascade of negativity flows out of society towards these people. These are these social consequences that we're going to talk about. And so I'm going to move through the remaining 16 in groups of 4. So let's start with wound number 3. Wolfensberger says, wound 3 is relegation to low social status or deviancy. Because of my bodily functional impairment, society relegates me to low social status to the point that I am considered deviant. Society defines the normal range so tightly that the slightest variation outside that normal range is considered deviance, and I am experiencing low status. I can remember once I was working with a church, and I said, I want to develop ministry to people with disabilities here. And the leadership of the church said, people with disabilities are not a priority for ministry. So I look on people. They have an intellectual disability or a physical disability, and as a result of that, my response is to say these people are of low social status and low priority. The church has the ability to totally change that in the way that they interact with people with disabilities. But the first wound, you're getting the feel for this now. The first wound is that because I have a bodily impairment resulting in a functional impairment, society looks on me and they think that I'm low social status and deviant and not a priority. The fourth wound is related to the third, and that is that there is an attitude of rejection that is disproportionate to my impairment, and it's relentless, meaning it's in virtually every situation a person finds themselves in. Because of my bodily functional impairment, I experience rejection by society, and the rejection is that it is relentless in that it occurs all the time in most social environments. Harm may be evidenced out of a faith system, like you sinned, we talked about the moral model. It may be unconscious. People who do unconscious rejection, it's still very harmful. And it is couched in positive motives. Why do we reject the people from the church? Because we need quiet so we can worship. So this attitude of rejection is something that we totally have to move against. A lot of this rejection grows out of our culture, particularly in a Christian setting within the church. We talked about that back when I discussed Mark 8 a little bit. And that is that the church culture, the practices that we have, our traditions have grown at a time when probably largely people with disabilities were not present in the church. And so now they show up and we don't know what to do. And so the easier thing to do, rather than to change our practices, as we talked about once again in Mark 8, is to reject the people. And unfortunately, it's sad that it occurs in a society, but it's particularly sad when it occurs in a local church or Christian community. The fifth one, Wolfensberger talks about how people are cast into one or more historic deviancy roles. Social status causes devalued roles or vice versa. It could be the other way around. Now, Wolfensberger states that people can be treated negatively in a variety of ways that have occurred throughout history. And most of these historic roles continue to the present day. I could spend a lot of time on each one of these, but let's unpack each one of these historic roles briefly. So these are things that have happened in history, may largely still be present today. And even if you don't see them right away, oftentimes they're right underneath the surface. And when there's any kind of conflict, they immediately pop their heads up and we see these things evidenced again. The first one, Wolfensberger says, is people with disabilities are treated as non-human or pre-human, or no longer human, or subhuman, or alien, or non-human but subhuman, but not subhuman. We need to be really, really careful when we think about this. Our language, the language that we use to describe people that would illustrate that we think that they're not entirely human, can lead to all kinds of negative treatment. In America, sometimes if a person has a very, very, very severe disability, doctors will call that person a vegetable or say that they are in a vegetative state. Well, that just leads to all kinds of negative treatment. If you're not a human being, now you're a vegetable. Well, why can't I do to you the things that I would do to a vegetable? So we want to be really, really careful with any language that we use that communicates to people that they're not, or communicates about people or to people that they're not fully human. Wolfensberger says the second one is that people are treated as a menace or an object of dread. This is particularly true in America back in the early 1900s, where people with disabilities were blamed for all the societal ills in America, and so they came to be feared because of that. A third one, Wolfensberger says, is that people are treated as waste material or garbage or discard. I worked for a while at a medical genetics clinic where I was providing educational kind of expertise. And I can remember the doctor that I would work with a little bit, if a child was prenatally diagnosed as having a disability, his response would basically be just, oh, just abort and try again, as if this child had no worth, but this child was basically garbage that could be thrown away. They were that undesirable. The fourth historic deviancy role Wolfensberger talks about is trivium. So people with disabilities are not to be taken seriously, but rather they're an object of ridicule, or there's something to laugh at, and we oftentimes will see that. The fifth one, people with disabilities are treated as an object of pity, accompanied by desire to bestow happiness on people associated with a victim person who is suffering. As an object of pity, it's not something, obviously we want to help people, but it's not something that we want to kind of treat them as if they're second-class citizens and talk about how hard it is to be you, and I'm going to come along and bless you with the things I'm going to do. And to treat someone as if they're pitiable is very, very demeaning. People are treated, number 6, as a charity recipient. And that is that their life is mostly so I can earn credit on some level with society or with God by being so kind to you. And so you are an object of charity. And you better be grateful for the charity that I provide to you. Once again, very condescending kind of notion of how we interact with people. We see all the time, number 7, that people, particularly adults with intellectual disabilities, are treated as if they're children. We'll talk some more in other places in this curriculum about age appropriateness. And that is that in any interactions with people with disabilities, particularly those with intellectual disabilities, we want to treat them according to what's called their chronological age, their actual age. So if someone has an intellectual disability but they're 20 years old, we treat them like a 20-year-old person would be treated. We don't say that they have a mental age, which is something that psychologists will sometimes say, of a 3-year-old, and then we interact with them like they're a 3-year-old. We always treat people according to their chronological age. Number 8, Wolfensberger talks about how people are seen as a sick or diseased organism. And if this is really important too. If someone is sick, then I don't want to be near them because I don't want to get sick. But there's a difference between being sick and being disabled, right? Between being sick and being disabled. People with cerebral palsy or intellectual disabilities or autism, they're not sick, they're disabled. So I should have no fear in interacting with them because I'm not going to catch some disease or something like that. But oftentimes we see people with disabilities portrayed as being sick. They're not sick, they're disabled, and it's very, very different. And then the final of these deviant role perceptions is in death-related roles. Wolfensberger says that people with disabilities are seen as dying, or already dead, or as good as dead, or should have been dead, or should never have lived. We see this a lot, where Wolfensberger would talk about, for many people with disabilities, the most dangerous place is the hospital, because they'll go there and oftentimes orders will be given to not resuscitate or not provide medical care that they might need. And we need to be careful, once again, with our language. We need to be careful with our language that we don't support the notion that a person with disabilities' life is not worth living. And there are many people who do that. Then there's wound 6, which talks about symbolic stigmatizing, marking, deviancy imaging, or what is called branding. Because of my bodily functional impairments, I'm given a negative label. Every society has these. It's funny. every place I went, I would ask the question when I talk about this: is there a word or a term that people use in this culture to describe people with disabilities? And in every place, there was some sort of a negative term that was used to describe people with disabilities. Every society has these, and interactions cascade out of the characterization. The church must be careful not to reflect society in the manner in which they deviance image people. However, we can be guilty of this as well. And for example, in California, where I'm at right now, where I live, only 0.1% of Christian schools have programs for children with disabilities. This was some data I took a while back. How children of Christian families who have disabilities are being imaged. They're either unworthy, unable to benefit, or not a priority for Christian education. We need to do a whole lot better in the church in this regard. We need to use terminology to describe people that is respectful, but we also need to make sure that we are not stigmatizing people in the way that we exclude them from things that we're doing.